Hi, welcome. Today I'm going today it's I think it's a more introductory live. The discussion will be more to explain what's PMI, the PMBOK, talk about the difference between the latest versions, like PMBOK 6 edition, PMBOK 7 edition. I prepared also an overview on different certifications. Not only certifications from PMI, but other certifications you can find in the market. Then I hope this is very useful. Uh, this is also based in a question that I get quite often about certifications. Things like which certification should I go for? Do I need a certification? What kind of certification is better for my industry? And I'm going to answer a few of those questions, and I hope it's clear for you in the end. And of course, if it's not, the key as always, the Q&A box is always open, or you can always send a direct message to me. Good. Then let's first talk about PMI. Let me just check if it's good enough to read it. Yeah, okay, it should be fine. If there's any problem, just send me a message here in the chat, and I'll take a look on that. Well, first of all, what's PMI? PMI stands for Project Management Institute. PMI is a non-profit organization. It's a professional association. It was founded in 1969, then a long time ago, much before I was even born, and I guess most of you also. PMI is probably the biggest project management organization around the world. As I mentioned here, that's the data I could find in the website. PMI is present in more than 200 countries, and in a lot of those countries, or at least in several of those countries, they have more than one chapter. The chapter is like the local unit. For example, if you go in the US, there's at least one PMI in each state in the US. It's kind of the same thing in Brazil. I live in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a small country, then there's only one PMI. And some of the other European countries, you can find only one PMI. But quite commonly, if you live in a big country, you're going to find uh, a local chapter if you live, of course, in a big city. Right now, PMI has more than 1.3 million people certified. That's a lot of people, but still, if you think about it, it's not so much if you think about our own global population and also on the data that it's shown about number of project management positions that will be required in the next years. That's nothing. Like just for the project management positions, we are talking about 2.6 million of people required until 2030 every year. Then 1.3 million people certification is still nothing compared with all the requirements. That's why project management is a professional profession that's growing a lot around the world and also makes sense, right? Because all the challenges that we have, like energy transition or all other challenges, reduce carbon emissions and this kind of stuff, that all those transformations they come with projects, then that's expected. That PMI also has a lot of nice stuff, I would say. They do like a project performance research. I shared, I think already at least quite a lot of information, like percentage of projects uh, that were completed on time, on budget, type of frameworks used in different organizations. And this research here, it's basically they send a survey for all the people they have in their database, and then the data that they have in this research is based on those replies. I've every year I think I get this, and also I participated. It's very significant because I think the last one I checked, they probably have more than 3,000 answers on that from people all around the world, then you get a pretty good sample. Of course, from people all around the world, but the concentration in US in countries like US and Brazil is still very high, but also PMI is consolidating its position. Then the question why I'm talking about PMI, because as I mentioned, that's the biggest project management organization. You can look for different options. When I talk about certification, you're going to see more of them, but PMI probably is the most known project management organization around the world. And why it's like that, and why people why companies also like to work with PMI, it's pretty simple. Because I work in a global organization, and all the past companies I worked, they were global. Then if you have a team that's located in Europe, in the US, or in South America, in Asia, or any part of the country, of the world, you can have a local chapter there where your employees can get engaged, but more important, they can get the training with basically the same frameworks and the same information with the same project management mindset. That helps a lot to make sure you can reach an alignment, a strategic alignment with project management, and also to prepare the right project management culture. Here it's not alignment, it's always difficult if you are talking about global organizations with big teams. I'm talking about more than 100 people spread around several countries. It's very nice that you can train people in this, using the same organization because you have the same definitions, they have the same concepts, they study usually for the same test, that's the PMB. I'm going to talk about it later on. But that's as a global organization, that's what you want. You don't want to get someone trained in a certification that's only applied or most that's only known in Europe. Because if you need to train someone like in South America, you might have a hard time. If you need to train someone, I don't know, India, Indonesia, and Japan, yeah, that will be difficult. Then having this global organization supporting project management across the board, and that's quite good. And because it's a non-profit and basically the members and the project managers working with that, they are the ones building up standards. They are the ones preparing or participating actively and preparing exams. And they answer research performs for the project. And another nice thing about PMI, they also have a salary research. I don't remember what's. You also can find this on my Instagram profile. There I have like a story that's on the highlights that's always there, and you can see the salary median per country. Then that also gives you, and they reply per country, the number of people that they reply their research. That gives you a pretty good idea on on everything about project management because you have project data performance, you have salaries description there. You can have the same certification, the same exam that you're going to do all around the world. You have the same frameworks training, then that helps a lot. That's why PMI is so big, and I think it's here for staying. You see, that's already uh, it was founded like a long time ago. Then I hope it stays, and that's about it about PMI. Then that gives you an idea what we are talking about. And every time you hear PMI, then you should learn. You can take a look on their website. It's pmi.org. They sell the PMBOK that I'm going to talk next, but they also have different certifications. They have some online training options, and that's also they have different ways you can interact with people around the world, and it's quite nice. And for people that wants to start with project management and say, but I'm not working and I don't have experience, you can volunteer with PMI. Then that's always a nice work to get some experience with project management. Working as a volunteer, of course, you're not going to get paid for that, but at least you can start to build your network with project management. You can start to see projects in reality, and you can grow there. Let's talk about PMBOK then, to give you an idea. PMBOK stands for Project Management Body of Knowledge. What happened here, the PMBOK first edition, PMBOK was first published as a white paper in 1987. Then you can see that's also not new. And the first official edition as a book was published in 1996. I'm not going to talk about the first edition, of course, but that gives you an idea when they start to build some standards, and that has been done for a long time. It's more than 30 years working on standards, and to build the PMBOK, there are inputs of I think tens of different project managements around the world, and that's how they come up with those best practices. Then I'm going to talk about the sixth edition. Then I'm going to talk about the seventh edition and talk about a bit how they changes. Okay, let me too big, too big. Well, the sixth edition on the PMBOK was the first edition that officially PMI added the Agile Practice Guide there. What does that mean? Because PMI since the beginning was a pro is was at least since this sixth edition was a process-based um, no, body of knowledge. And what body of knowledge stand for? If you read there, it's saying that those things listed there, they're best practices that work in most of the cases. But since probably for the 4 or 5 edition, you can find that that's written there that all those processes there, that does not mean that it should be necessarily used in all the projects, and it's up to the project management to define what's applicable to their case or not. Why it's written there? Because projects are different. You can manage a project that has a budget of $20,000 and you can manage a project that has a budget of $1 billion. Then those type of different projects, they have different requirements. Then looking a bit on this sixth edition, what you could find there. You have basically it was a prescriptive, meaning that you had 10 knowledge areas that I'm going to present next, with 49 different process there, and they were combined in process groups. Basically, a process group, it's like initiation, planning, monitoring, controlling, execution, and closing. And if you think about 49 process, always have connections and they interact with each other. Then it can get really complex if you just try to memorize everything. Then that can be a theme for a different discussion, but that's something you keep in mind. What's important when you look for this big big book here, because I think the sixth edition has more than 600 pages. It's important that you understand the knowledge areas and you understand their interaction there, how they work together, and you have an idea how the process should flow. Because if you just try to memorize all those processes, because each process has inputs, outputs, and also different tools you can use, you just are going to go crazy there. Then, okay, in the sixth edition, we had this big book there with 10 knowledge areas. What are those knowledge areas? Basically, it's integration, scope, time, cost, quality, resources, communication, risk management, procurement, and stakeholders. If you are working a project, you for sure you can see all of those things. Scope, time, cost, quality, resource, communication, it's one of the most important things in projects, and you see that things go wrong very often because of issues with the communication. Of course, risk management, procurement, and stakeholders. One interesting thing here, I'm not going to go in deep in those knowledge areas today, but just to give you an idea, like the integration chapter exists only to make sure that it works as a glue to make sure that all the process, all the other knowledge areas, they interact. Then together, integration, together the risk management is the knowledge area that has the most process there. And of course, the first process that you have in the integration is to start the project, that's to have the project charter, and there's the identify stakeholders, but that's a different discussion. But then gives you an idea that you start with the integration starts and close all the projects, and also the closing of a project, it's done inside the integration process. Why? Because to start a project and to close a project, you need to look for all the knowledge areas here. One of the big criticisms that I see, and I've seen a lot about PMBOK, and mainly from the sixth edition and behind that one, 5.4 and the other ones, it's because it's 10 knowledge areas and 49 process. If you try to apply all those processes in one only project, it gets very, very heavy. What I mean by that? Well, you start to get a lot of paper. And depending on the size of your project, that does not add any value there. Then one of the criticisms here from you can see in a lot of a lot of places there, it's because, oh, you're just creating paper, you are more taking care of the documentation, and you forget about the project and the value being delivered there. You can see it in very different ways. In my view, reading parts of the PMI, as I mentioned in the introduction, is clearly stated there that a project man, those are best practices that work most of the time. That does not mean that you should always do that, and that does not mean they are going to work all the time, and does not mean also that's important that is said there that the project manager is responsible to select what is more applicable for his project. I understand this criticism about the PMBOK because I've seen project managers that they would only look for the paperwork. Then starting a project, they would look, I need a project plan. Then they would focus more in developing the project plan than like working with your team. Then of course that does not work. Project management is about adding value, not about creating paper. All the things that you're going to do here, they have a purpose. As I mentioned, if you are working on a small project with a small budget, your requirements are completely different. If you are working $1 billion projects with thousands of people working around it, yes, you need a structure and very likely you're going to use a lot, if not all those processes. Then keep that in mind. Then there was a lot of criticism. Then of course then the agile methodology or the agile mindset starts to work in the 90s or even earlier because agile you can argue, but agile's foundation comes out from lean management, and the way things are developed on lean, they are different. The idea is that you do not, or it's stated in the agile manifest, the idea is not to focus on the paperwork. Does not mean that agile does not have paperwork, but just make sure you put the focus in the right area. Again, in the PMBOK, it's never written anywhere that the most important thing that you should do here is the processes. It's the idea that it's a book with all the processes that you are going to need if you have the big, complex, and huge project. I'm talking about here, for example, I work in one of my projects that was inside a mine. Then you can imagine just working for this was a mine expansion. I was just responsible for one piece of that. You can imagine only for that they had more than 10,000 people working only for the expansion. Then it gets quite heavy. Then you need to think about the stakeholders, not the people working the project, but you have a lot of impact on the local community in the city, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be considered there. Okay, then that's the first part that you're going to see in the PMBOK. As I mentioned, the sixth edition was the first version that the Agile Practice Guide was also included there. The idea was to start to move away from this idea that PMI only looks for the traditional paperwork waterfall, and just make sure that yeah, if you're a project manager, you also need to understand how that an agile framework. Why? because different projects in different situations will require different frameworks. That's a very important thing that you need to keep in mind forever if you're working in project management. Then the Agile Practical Guide was very, I'm not saying simple, but it was very straightforward. You start explaining what's Agile, then you had an Agile Manifesto, you have the 12 Agile Principles, then you talk about project life cycle, create an Agile environment, delivering an Agile environment, and organization consideration. Again, those two here, they go together because a lot of times when you look for Agile Practical Guide, or if you start to look for there's a Scrum body of knowledge or Scrum guiders, those kinds of standards that you can get out there. What you're going to note that there's a lot of focus on the process and of course in how to deal with the team. But for example, you do not see a lot of things like cost management or risk management. They structure are much more simpler. I'm not saying that's bad because depending on the if you are really in a giant environment, you need to have some flexibility in cost, but yeah, cost management it's very likely always to be is going to be there. Then what happened? After the sixth edition here, on last year on 2021, PMI published the seventh edition with a quite a lot of change there. First thing that's important to make. The sixth edition was a very process based edition. What, as I mentioned, was very prescriptive. Like you start a project with the project charter, you identify stakeholders, then you have done your initiation project, then you move to the planning process groups where you need to start to identify requirements. You have a logical flow that you need to follow there in your project. But this logical flow here a lot of those process groups, they are mainly using a waterfall environment. And once you move for an agile, some of those process groups, they might not be so relevant on those situations anymore. Why? Because different types of project, different types of company, different types of team. Then PMI, they changed this edition to instead of being a process based, now it's a principle based. What does that mean? Means that you have uh, basic principles that they can work like an umbrella, and you can use all types of framework with that. Then you can use Scrum, you can use the crystal orange or whatever you want to call it. You can use Kanban, you can use lean management, you can use waterfall and everything goes under those principles because those are fundamental principles that you need to execute the project. What's important also to understand that from the sixth edition for the seventh edition does not replace the sixth edition, meaning that everything that's stated in the sixth edition it's very also it's still relevant, it's still important, it's still you still need to know that because when you face the different projects, you're going to understand the different frameworks, then you understand which direction you should go. And as I mentioned, those same principles can be used in any framework. Looking here for the principles, then you have stewardship, you have team, you have stakeholders, you have value, you need to have system thinking, leadership, tailoring. Tailoring stands for selecting the right framework in the right situation. Quality, complexity. All projects have different complexity. You need to deal with that. You always have risks. You need to be adaptable and resilient for all those things. This is quite important for any type of project. And you always have change. All projects have change. How to deal with the change, you can discuss it, what's the better way, but our projects will always have change. It can be more or less, but I've never seen a project without any change. That's guaranteed that you are going to have something there. What mean those principles here? Because to manage a project, you're always going to need these principles because you always have a team. You always need to think about your stakeholders. You need to think about stewardship, that's thinking what's the best way to do it, or not exactly the economical way, but how you develop things in a more sustainable way. You need to think about value. You need to have system thinking because you sometimes if you focus only on your project, you forget for everything that's going to around it. Yeah, if your project succeed but the company fail, that's also not a success. Of course, you need leadership to lead your team. You need tailoring. You need to understand your quality requirements. You need to understand the complexity of your product, the complexity of your project. You can have a complexity in your supply chain, and there's all types of different dimensions you can look into complexity. Risk, that's pretty obvious. All projects have risks, and that's from the basic nature of projects that you are always going to have risk. Why? Because in the beginning of the project, you have a lot of uncertainties, even if you're following a waterfall approach. And those uncertainties, they mean what? Uncertainty is equal to risk. And that's why you always have risks. Adaptability and resilience. You, the idea that you need to be flexible to adapt according with the situation, and you need to be resilient because you're always going to have setbacks, you're always going to face challenges, and if you're not resilient, that's a problem. And again, about change, I already mentioned on that. Oops. Then you have all those project management principles here that can be used anywhere, and then PMI, they define what they call project management performance domains. Then it's those are the domains that you need to work with to make sure that you can perform in a project. Then the principles are like the underlying foundation for everything. But then you need to work with your stakeholders, you need to work with your team, you need to understand your development approach and life cycle, you need to have planning, you need to have a project work, you need to have deliverables or delivery, how it's called here. You need to have a way to measurement, and you have the uncertainty that's inherent to any kind of project. Then the main change here is that you are moving from a prescriptive process-based book to a more principle-based. And that's also PMI way to get back to the criticism saying that the project management from the PMBOK only thinks about paperwork. Now it's clear that's not. In my view, was already clear in other versions, but some people they want to interpret, you can interpret it, of course, in different ways. But right now, there's a lot of focus on the principles that you need to execute to be a good project management, and not focusing on only follow the 49 processes, like trying to do it as a machine and forget about everything else. Then you can see that the PMBOK starts to be much more relevant for all the areas because this criticism was there, and I've even heard it myself. One probably a couple of years ago, a guy working software development, he was whatever those guys are saying, this is the best. Those guys are dead. No one's going to follow this. And I was just listening. Of course, it's his point of view of mm, managing a software development. It's very, very different from managing a big construction project. I can tell you by experience. And also, one of the difference that you can see there that adapting to change is not so easy. And also, for some things, you don't want to have a lot of flexibility. Why? Before I move to the certifications, just want to make sure that I give this example. If you are building a bridge, you have an entire design developed to build that bridge. What you don't want people making changes in the while building the bridge without knowing the impact of that, because it's very dangerous, and you can basically it can cost lives. Then some of those tasks you don't have flexibility because the idea you follow a very strict process. because that can mean if you start to deviate it and if it's very flexible, you are probably putting lives at risk. Then just keep that in mind. And every time people say, no, you need to adapt to change very fast, I do agree, you need to adapt to change. Companies need to do that. But for some areas, a lot of, here I'm talking about a lot of engineering projects, you don't want to have this flexibility for a specific reason that if instead of, for example, you are building a foundation of a skyscraper and someone decide, I'm not going to use this steel. I find a cheap one. Let's do this one. And they do not know the reason why this steel is there. Then that might cause a lot of problems in the future. And that can make instead of that, if you develop a software, of course, can cost you a lot of hours and it will cost you also a lot of money. But if you are developing a building, if the foundation is wrong, you just need to break everything down and build it again. That will cost you millions and months to do that. Okay, then this is also was the overview on the PMBOK. And PMBOK stands for the Project Management of Body of Knowledge. Then you have the sixth edition, that's a prescriptive edition, and then the seventh edition PMI starts to be much more focusing on a principle-based project management. Let's talk about certifications. Here I select few of them. I'm not going to also to talk about all the certifications for all those different types of organizations because even for PMI, they have a lot of different certifications. I open here a few examples and to show in the overview. For example, only for people with less experience, PMI has one, two, three, four different types of certification. Then also they have the specialization certifications that you can see there are also a lot of them there. Then I also have more experience. Then trying to cover all those certifications also in my point of view does not make sense. Then I'm going to talk with the most common stuff that you see there and for the organization. And then of course, if you need to work with that in your reality, you need to go deeper. And if you have questions, you can always reach out. Then, of course, let's start by PMI. I just mentioned to you that PMI is the um, probably the biggest project management organization around the world. Then in PMI, I'm just selecting here the certifications they have per experience. You see that also there are some certifications that are specializations that you can take. But basically, if you have less than 3 years if you have less than 3 years of experience, if you are new, you have two options: the CAPM, and also do you have the ACP. ACP stands for Agilist. Let me go back here. Certificate Association in Project Management and Agile Certified Practitioner. When you talk about, and then you also have, if you have more experience, you can go for PMP. PMP stands for Project Management Professional. You can work for the PBA, it's Professional Business Analyst. And then you also have the certifications that if you are very experienced, that's for program management and also for portfolio management. What I also want to make sure I want to put here, I'm also doing the same for a few of the other certifications. This is just the cost to take the exam. That does not include any prep call, any prep training that you're going to do. It does not include the books, does not include simulation or anything else. Then I don't know about you, but you can see that none of those certifications they are really cheap. And that's why I always say that's very important to understand because I always get the question, which certification should I go for? And like if you go for a certification that's not very well recognized, the value that you're adding in your CV and the doors that this certification can open to you, they are going to be more limited. The most famous certification around the world is PMP. that covers most industries in most countries. I think yesterday I also did a poll in the stories just to have an idea because I have people from all around the world following me, and the result of the pool it's more than 75% in their industry, in their country, the most relevant certification is PMP. Then that gives you a very good idea how this works. A lot of people think, I'm going to go for the CAPM. In my point of view, does not add a lot of value. What you need to look for to have a certification is like, I'm going to work, for example, I want to work with software development. Go on LinkedIn. I'm not sure, of course. I know in different countries you're going to see different ways to publish open positions, but in Europe, in the US, and I believe also in Brazil, you can find most of the positions on LinkedIn. Then it's quite simple. Go for those positions, look for the job description. In the job description, you should be able to see what certification they're asking or if there are any. Sometimes they don't ask any certification. Sometimes they say it's a nice to have, and sometimes they say it's a requirement. And from my experience, for probably 85 of all the applications I've seen, or even more, it's always PMP. Sometimes they mention PMP or Prince 2, they also consider equivalent, but PMP is always there. Then that's why I'm saying that if you are going to invest quite a lot of money, why you're thinking a certification that will not open a lot of doors for you. I can tell by my experience, PMP opened a lot of doors for me. What I mean by open doors? Yeah, I got some interviews just because I had a PMP. Of course, after the interview, it's up to you. You need to pass the interview and you need to perform in your work, then it's not getting a certification. But if you are, for some positions, they have tens of curriculums there, or sometimes hundreds, depending on the company. Having a PMP will put you in the top of the list. Then that helps. Then you also have Prince. Prince is very famous in the UK. I mentioned here when I talk about the job requirements in Europe, a lot of job requirements depending on the company. You can see Prince 2 or PMP as equivalent. In Brazil, you can see some Prince 2, but PMP is by far the most famous one again. And you see also the cost of those certifications. This is just the exam cost. It might vary a bit depending when you are taking the exam, depending on the country and so on, but that gives you an idea about the price. Then basically you also can see Prince, they also have more stuff with Agile and they have a foundation, they have practitioner for more experience. It's you see if you look for how they organize, they're very similar. Like meaning that they have an entry certification, they have an certification that they experience one. That's usually the one that will give you that will open doors for you. Just the entry certification, it's not very helpful, I would say. Then you also have the Screw Alliance. The Screw Alliance, they have, of course, this is when you look more for software development or IT related projects that gets much more relevant there. Then you have certifications from your Scrum team. You can be a certified Scrum Master, or you can be, I don't remember what the A stands for, but that's the next one after the certified Scrum Master. Then you can be a senior Scrum Master experience. Then you have a certification for product owner following the same idea. You have a certification for developer following the same idea. And then you have the Agile leadership certification guide levels. Or you can find a big rainbow of all types of the certifications there. For the Screw Online, one of the things that's differently to get the certification from Screw Online, and you need to buy a training from them. and this organization providing the training needs to be accredited by the Screw Alliance. And when you pay the training, the exam, at least the first one, it's already included. If you need to retake it, you need to pay an extra. I believe it's $100 just extra. But also get that gives you an idea that if you're going to buy the training and the certification it's included there, it will not cost you than thousands of dollars. I was looking also only to have an idea of price. I could not see anything less than that. What's the difference between when you talk about the Screw Alliance and the PMP, for example? Well, this you're going to see a lot on software development or a lot of on IT industries, and PMP you're going to see cross industries. Right now, with the latest changes on the PMI, on the PMBOK, as I mentioned, the sixth edition, the agile framework was included, and now with the seventh edition being principle based to be a to be an umbrella for all types of frameworks. I see that the PMI tends to grow a lot even into software because PMI is already well recognized even in software. Depends if you go for a country, depends on your country, and my point of view, that just tends to grow with the latest change on the PMBOK. Then you also have the Scrum.org, where you can have different, again, Scrum Alliance and Scrum.org, they have similar certifications. They have all those organizations, at same as PMI has an entry certification, and then you have more different certifications that you can build on if you have more experience. For the Scrum.org, if you look for example, professional Scrum Master, they have the PS1. If you need to take the test, it costs you $150. PS2 costs $250. PS3, that I believe, I do not remember the requirements by heart, but I believe it should be or similar or equivalent of the PMP. Then you can see also the value range there, they're similar. And you also have the professional Scrum product owner, professional agile leadership, professional Scrum development. If you look for the Scrum Alliance, they are very, very similar in the structure of the certifications. Why I'm presenting this? Because in some industries, some of those certifications might be more relevant, depending also in the country that where you are. Then it's always good to know. Without knowing anything, I would always suggest you to go for the PMP for sure, because then you can cover most of industries and most of the countries. And also you also have SAFe, that they scaled agile framework, and SAFe also has the same idea. You have a more introductory certification that you can be an agilist, you can be a practitioner, you can be a scrum master. Something about the SAFe is the same thing as the Screw Alliance. Oh, sorry, here I did not change. My bad. You do not buy the certification standalone. You usually buy the certification with the training. If you look for values, it will not be cheap anyway. And for some of those certifications, they are overlapping because, for example, PMP, it covers right now, it covers a lot on the Agile framework. Then, depending on the certification you're going for, it starts to be redundant. Of course, if you're going for, I don't know, PSM3, it's equivalent to PMP, it might be very similar, but it also, from these other organizations, you can have those like Agile leadership, like or training or Scrum Master. You have like Scrum Master coach certifications. There are different levels that, depending where you are, also might be a value added for you. But even for when you look for the senior certifications from PMI, last time I checked the numbers there, for those two combined, for the program management and portfolio management, there were less than 10,000 people certified around the world, which gives you a pretty much idea that there's not a lot of people that has this certification. and that's not very well known because what happened very commonly people do not understand the range of certification. They just going to stick with the most famous one that the moment is PMP. Then if you say I'm a program manager certified, blah blah blah, they will not have the idea how difficult to get it. Even PMP, most people don't have the idea how difficult it's to get it, but they know that you need to prove experience, you need to pass the exam, and you know there it's not a cheap one. Why the idea is to put the price here? Because also just going for the certifications, it can be time consuming because you need to study, you need to do an exam. Some of those exams will be easier than others, but none of those processes will be cheap. Then if you're going for something, just really go for something that will bring you value. Because if you are going for a certification that will not add any competitive advantage in your CV, will not help you to open any doors in your career, then basically, in my point of view, you're kind of wasting your time or money. Would be better to pursue something and prepare for something, even it's harder and if it takes longer. Then like don't aim low here. Okay, here I'm trying to cover the main certifications, PMI. If you talk about PMI, Prince 2, Screw and License, Screw.org, and Safe, you are covering very likely most of the certifications. I'm aware that in some place, in some countries, they have, like I'm living in the Netherlands. I know that in Germany they have a specific certification that's famous in Germany and maybe in a specific area. And then I'm not adding that here because you probably can find, if just the big ones, you can find probably more than tens of certification. If you also start to add those small ones, you can go crazy. Again, what type of certification might depends on where you're located in your industry, but something I learned in my life, you never know about the future. Some like you might decide to pursue international career, you might want to move to a different company, you might move cities, or you whatever it's going might happen here. Then it's much better to have a certification that's well recognized and can cover a big range here. And again, just having a certification by having a certification that no one knows and will not help you with anything. It's nice, of course, because you're studying and you're learning, and hopefully you are also applying practice. But if you are investing all this money, also make sure that you also have some return for you and for your career there. Okay, I hope right now then you have more clarity what about what's PMI, what's PMBOK, and what about the different certifications that there are there. And I hope this can be useful for your career. Again, I would love to hear from you if you have questions and if something is not clear, what you are thinking about those lives, and if there's any way I can help you with, and or more topics that you like to hear, just let me know. You can send via Q&A box, or you also can also send a direct message to me, or you can always even comment here on YouTube. I hope you like it. I hope you enjoy it. And then see you around. Thank you.